in Proverbs chapter 6, so you can pick where you want to start. As this morning, God reminds us that Jesus lives and that our hope is in Him, and that every need, just as God the Father met every need that Jesus had in the garden, at the cross, at the tomb as it began, and then as it ended, God assures us that He will meet our every need, that He knows it, and that the worst that can happen is our death, and that will be conquered. And the songs we've just sung remind us of what we live for and what we even wait for death for. Each month following the class, I try to choose a subject that, at least part of which, would be easy to understand by at least some of those who are younger. And if I go over their head, parents, maybe you can take something and boil it down at another time or season for them. A couple of months ago, looked at Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 23, where Solomon says, "Buy the truth and do not sell it." Buy the truth and do not sell it. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding. And in that lesson, I focused on the first part of buying the truth, because the truth is valuable and not totally free. That's what this verse suggests. You have to buy it. Not in the sense that you earn it or even deserve it. God is the one who has delivered it. It's not something that we create in our own mind, but God makes it available. But you have to buy it. Truth costs us something. And that may be what we have to give, or it may be what we have to give up if we're really going to accept the truth. The second part of this proverb, or at least the first line, is buy the truth and do not sell it. So once you bought it, that's one step, but then there's a challenge to not selling the truth, and also wisdom and instruction and understanding. And that's what I want to focus more on tonight, of understanding what happens if I sell the truth. Buying and selling implies an exchange. If I sell the truth, I get something in exchange. And so that's what I want us to think about tonight. So buy the truth and do not sell it. What is relatively obvious? If I sell the truth, there's only one thing that I can get in exchange. It's something that's not the truth. And so I sell it for a lie. Now that's not how that's not how Satan makes the deal sound. He's not going to present it that way. But that's ultimately what happens. Read with me from Proverbs chapter 6, and then I'll use an example of a family that fulfills these verses not in a good way. Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 19. "These 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to Him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren." So how is Satan going to sell a product like this? Well, first he has to get people to buy a lie, to believe a lie, and if he can get someone there, then he can get them in any of these directions. And to look at a specific example of that, go back to Genesis chapter 37. Satan sold these lies to the brothers of Joseph. And I don't know what it is about these 7 things in Proverbs chapter 6. I don't know why those things are there and other things aren't. And I'm not suggesting there's a link between these two, but the brothers of Joseph all found a way to buy the things that Solomon talks about here. In Genesis 37 and verse 2, we read that Joseph brought a bad report of his brothers. And we're not given those details, but based on what we know of his brothers later, and based on what we know of Joseph, what appears most likely is he brought an accurate report. And from what we can tell of them, they don't seem to be the kind that when faced with the truth, react humbly to it. And so I'm going to assume here that Satan sold them to the lie that, hey, look, whatever you've done is your own business. Your brother doesn't have any job, any business telling your father what you've done. And so if they reacted stubbornly with a proud look, it's because they bought that lie that what you do is your own business. Well, they were part of a family. That's a lie. Then in verse 4, we find, and Jacob helped to provoke his children to wrath in part by his favoritism towards Joseph, but then they have their own responsibility. And so in verse 4, after he gets the coat, it says they can't speak, or they don't speak kindly to him. And then at the end of verse 8, when Joseph has the first dream and he tells them about it, that just feeds the fervor of their envy and their jealousy and hatred. In verse 11, Joseph has another dream, and when he tells it to them, even his father didn't like it. But verse 11 says that he thought about the matter, but for as far as his brothers, they just hated him even more. Satan sold them the lie that of sowing discord by suspicion and accusation, as though that was going to change anything. Did it help their father love them any more, or Joseph any less, by their suspicions and whatever they said among themselves after Joseph told them about those dreams? We don't know what their conversations were, but not hard to imagine. I think it's safe to assume their conversations would have involved someone who sows discord among brethren. Solomon also warns about a heart that devises wicked plans and feet that are swift to running to evil. Can you think of anywhere where that describes Joseph's brothers? In Genesis 37, in verses 18 through 20, when they've gone out and Joseph is sent to look for them, and he's headed the right direction, and they see him coming from afar. In verses 18 through 20, they see him and they say, "Oh, here comes the dreamer," and their heart devises a wicked plan. And the first plan is to do what? Feet that are swift, running to evil. Hands that were ready to shed innocent blood. They said, "We're going to kill him, and we'll just go tell our father, well, he must have been killed by a wild beast." How did Satan get them there? Well, he got them there because of the envy, the hatred that they kept in their heart, and then they found ways and reasons to renew that and to deepen their hatred and frustration and their bitterness. And so it grew and grew, and then they were presented with an opportunity that they couldn't have planned, but now they were ready even to shed innocent blood. Now, of course, they didn't do so, but they were ready to. In verses 31 and 32, Satan was able to sell them the product of a lying tongue and being false witnesses. They were ready to tell their father a total lie to cover up what they did. Now, the lie that Satan sold them is the lie that every liar buys, is nobody's going to find out. Now, nobody would lie if they knew or believed that it would be found out. So they thought, well, we can cover our tracks, we can shed innocent blood, we can have lying tongues and tell false witness, because Satan deceived them into thinking, well, nobody will find out. How many times have we all learned that never works? And so we've covered Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 through 19, just in these few verses of Genesis 37. And so this serves to warn us. If Satan can convince you, back to that list in Proverbs chapter 6, if Satan can deceive you into believing even one lie in order to practice any one of these things, if he can convince you of one, why can't he convince you of two? If he can convince you of two, why can't he convince you of three and of four? The point is that there's nowhere that Satan can't convince us to go. We could read those 7 verses, and we could all pick out some things we have done or things we haven't done, and maybe even look at some things and think, well, I would never. Well, but if he's already fooled us in one area, if we've already sold the truth and bought a lie in one area, then we can be susceptible to another and to another. The brothers and the family of Joseph teach us that, and they warn us as well, that there's not a home, much less a heart, that can protect itself against these things once I sell the truth. Because when I sell the truth, I've guaranteed that I receive a lie. So buy the truth and do not sell it, because if you sell it, what you receive is a lie. But that verse, Proverbs 23, also says, also wisdom and instruction and understanding. So I want to also think about those as well. So buy the truth and don't sell it. And this point is, well, also buy wisdom. Buy wisdom and don't sell wisdom. Well, what happens if you do? Again, Satan's not going to sell you a product and the label on the jar is not going to be, here, have some foolishness for your wisdom. He doesn't market it that way. But that's why we have the book of Proverbs to help us to realize when we recognize something as wise, then if we go another direction, the only other direction from wisdom is foolishness. I'm going to think about wisdom in the process of making decisions. I'm going to read from Ecclesiastes 4 and then several Proverbs. I'll have all the verses on the screen to move a little quicker. But if you want to follow in your own text, I'm going to start in Ecclesiastes 4. This is that well-known section about two are better than one. And it could cover a lot of different applications. I want you, though, to think about the application of decision-making. Think about, there may be times where we don't have time or opportunity to get advice from others in decisions, but usually, and especially in bigger decisions, we have that opportunity. So think about that application. When you have some decision to make, and the more important it is, then the more important it is that we buy wisdom. Two are better than one. Again, we're thinking in the process of making decisions because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Clearly, Solomon is not just talking about people who walk alone, lie down alone, and are in a fight alone. He just gives these three examples to get our attention to realize there is, as the other, I guess, American proverb goes, safety in numbers. There are benefits that come with having the help of other people, and especially that's true in decision making. And so here's one way that God offers help. He offers us other people not to make decisions for us, but even in the days of our youth, God offers us other people to help us in the process of making decisions. Who are those people? Well, of course, first of all, God offers Himself to help us make decisions. Proverbs 15:29, the Lord is far from the wicked, but He hears the prayers of the righteous. One of the things the righteous, the wise, will do is pray to God for help in the process of making decisions. But that's not the only source of help God offers. In Proverbs 15 and verse 22, without counsel plans go awry, but in the multitude of counselors they are established. Again, think back to Ecclesiastes 4 for some commentary from this text. Proverbs 25:19, confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. Again, go back to that section in Ecclesiastes. If someone falls and he's hoping that his friend will help him, but if he's got an unfaithful friend, he's not going to have any help. If he's cold or if he's in the battle and he's relying on someone else, well, if he relies on the wrong kind of person, then he's worse off in that case than if he were by himself. And so the multitude of counselors would imply wise counselors. And so God offers wise counselors to help us make decisions. Again, that doesn't mean they make the decision for us. It doesn't even mean that these wise counselors will always have a different answer. It does not mean you know nothing. You've always got to find the answer from someone else. That's not what Solomon is saying. But the guarantee is if you are in the habit of seeking counsel in the process of decisions, you will benefit from that. You will gain wisdom, even on the times when you talk to others and they give you the answer that you had already. Well, you will learn from that process. So that's the way of wisdom in decision making. Seek the help. Every source of help that God offers. But of course, when God is offering one, then Satan is offering the other. Satan tempts you to sell your wisdom, and if you do, for foolishness. What does foolishness look like in the process of making decisions? Proverbs 18, 1 and 2. A man who isolates himself. He cuts everybody else off. A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He knows what he wants. He doesn't want to hear what anyone else has to say. And he rages against all wise judgment. A fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. He sells wisdom and buys foolishness. This is a pretty familiar proverb. Think about it in this context, in the context of someone making decisions. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is the way of death. If it seems right to him, but he gets some counsel, some advice from wise counselors, then that way may have headed him in the wrong direction, but then he can be turned away by it, by wise counsel. And then Proverbs 12:15, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise. So the old idea, well, I already know, so I don't need anybody's help, that doesn't fit the wisdom that we read in the earlier Proverbs. Other people might, we might just gain confidence in our idea because others reinforce that. Or others might say, that's a good idea, but here, tweak it a little bit, and maybe it can be improved. And then sometimes we'll have to swallow our pride. Someone offers some advice that contradicts the way we thought about going. And yet with humility and patience, then we can accept and receive the benefits of their advice. Look at 1 Kings chapter 12. If the principles there are not as easy to grasp, then put them into the face of Rehoboam. In 1 Kings chapter 12, the son of Solomon, ironically, the majority of the Proverbs were written by Solomon, and so here's his son. Surely Solomon talked to, or Rehoboam overheard, or directly heard from his father this kind of wisdom. In 1 Kings chapter 12, Solomon dies. Rehoboam is his son, is the next king. And the people come to him early on in his new reign, and they say, your father laid some heavy taxes on us. And part of the reason Solomon did that was building the temple. But that wasn't the only reason. So they come and say, could you lighten the load? Could you lower taxes? And so read with me the process of Rehoboam's decision, verses 5 through 11, thinking about both sides of what we've read about counsel. So he said to them, depart for 3 days, and then come back to me. And the people departed. Then Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he still lived. And he said, how do you advise me to answer these people? They spoke to him, saying, if you will be a servant to these people today, and serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given him, and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. Can you see any of the Proverbs that we've already read in this? Verse 9 continues, he said to them, what advice do you give? How should we answer the people who have spoken to me, saying, lighten the yoke which your father put on us? Then the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, thus you should speak to this people who have spoken to you, saying, your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us. Thus you shall say to them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastened you with whips, but I will chasten you with scourges. Rehoboam sold wisdom for foolishness. He followed the advice of his friends, of his peers. Notice he started off with wisdom. In verse 5, it was wise for them to come and ask him, and for him to not give an instant answer. He said, let me think about it for 3 days. That's a good habit. And then he took a step in the right direction by talking to those who were older than him. They must have sat and talked with Solomon about how much to tax the people and the effect of that. And so they had some wisdom, and he did well to ask and to listen. But then did you notice he didn't listen to them and then go listen to his peers and then compare the answer? He didn't even do that. As soon as they told him this answer, he immediately rejected it, which tells you what? He already had his mind made up. They didn't tell him what he wanted to do, so he rejected that. And then his friends, his peers, told him what he had, it seems to me, already made his mind up to do. And they were kind of yes men. And so he followed their advice. He sold wisdom for foolishness. And the problems that came from that, you can read and find, but they outlive Rehoboam. And this is what leads from the period of the united kingdom to the divided kingdom. That happens because of someone who traded wisdom for foolishness in the process of making decisions. So think about the kinds of decisions at any phase of life that you make. It would be rare that you would make a decision that other people have never made. The majority of the time, you're making decisions that other people have already made. Parents, grandparents, people older than you, maybe some people who are your age, but not as often. But others have already made the kinds of decisions you're making. And so Solomon says, buy wisdom and do not sell it. He says, wisdom, buy the truth, also wisdom and instruction. Buy instruction and do not sell it. Instruction requires that we wait, and then we have to listen, and then we have to learn how to use what we had. So that what we learned. So that's not an instant, immediate process, but that's wisdom. Wisdom is to receive instruction. The other side of that is impulse doesn't require much waiting. It doesn't require that you listen. It doesn't require that you apply the things that you've heard. Impulse is, well, I know what to do, and I'm going to do it immediately. Think about what Solomon would say. I'm going to stay in the book of Proverbs. In that circumstance, do not sell instruction for impulse. One of the many themes of the book of Proverbs is our words, the power of our words, the influence of our words. God's word, of course, the Bible teaches the power of God's word. Ours is not the same, but our speech, our words to maybe ourselves in private, but even to other people, our speech has effects that are more powerful than we realize. And the book of Proverbs helps to tune us in to that. In Proverbs, Solomon does not make a list of here are permitted words, here is a holy vocabulary, here are forbidden words, these are the ones you never say. But he speaks more generally to help us think about, in either case, the effect of what we see, of what we say. And so I'll read through several Proverbs here. Proverbs 15:4. A wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in the tongue, perverseness breaks the spirit. Do you know your tongue is strong enough to break the spirit of other people? Proverbs 15:23. A man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. Proverbs 12:18. There is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword. It cuts, it sticks, it burns, it wounds. And then the opposite of that, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. Proverbs 16:24. Pleasant words are like honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bones. Two more. Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. I think that means both ways. Those who like to use the power of their tongue for death, they will eat the fruit of death. and those who seek to use their tongue to promote life, then they'll eat the fruit of life. And one more. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. So that gives something easy to visualize, a beautiful decoration. And here this says that words, the right kind of words, are just like that. They enhance and they add beauty to the occasion when they're spoken. So, just to go back through these, some words are wholesome, promote health, pleasantness, sweetness, joy, and life, and they're like apples of gold in settings of silver. Other words break the spirit, they pierce like a sword, and they bring the fruit of death. So, which of those would be the result of waiting and listening? In other words, instruction. Words that are the result of instruction. I'm willing to wait and listen and think before I speak. And then which of these are typically the result of impulse? Speaking on impulse, I say what I feel with very little filter. There are two proverbs that speak specifically to impulse. Proverbs 29, verse 20. Do you see a man hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. And then Proverbs 10:19. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. That's what Solomon said about words that are the result of instruction versus the words based on impulse. I'll turn to 1 Samuel 17, again, to put a face to some of these principles. 1 Samuel chapter 17 is the section of David and Goliath. And so David is sent, you remember, by his father, go check on your brothers, take some provision to them, see how the battle is going. And so David goes. When he gets there, it's the time when Goliath comes out with his challenge. And so David hears that, and it bothers David. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine in verse 26 that he should defy the armies of the living God? And so his faith is bothered by what Goliath says. It's also interesting then he asks, or people tell him, the guy that kills Goliath, he's going to get to marry Saul's daughter. His family will never have to pay taxes. And there may have been some other benefits that were mentioned. And as David shows interest in that, read with me 1 Samuel 17 and notice the words of his older brother Eliab. And as I read, just think about the Proverbs we read and speaking words of instruction versus speaking based by impulse, and see what you think fits, and then think about the fruit of each that we read. 1 Samuel 17, 28. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, "Why did you come down here? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see a battle." What do you think? Instruction or impulse? David wasn't perfect. We certainly learned that later in his life, but do you remember what is said about David? Why God chose him to be the king? A man after God's own heart. So David certainly had moments, no doubt, of pride and insolence, but had David come on this occasion for those reasons? Again, he was sent by his father. What did Eliab know about David's heart? Maybe he was the oldest brother. I don't know everything that he had seen in David up to this point, but we can just base David on his fruits, judge David based on his fruits, and the fruits of the rest of this day tell us that David is not there out of pride and arrogance, but out of obedience to his father, and then he accepts the challenge to Goliath in defense of God's people and even the name of God. So does it sound like Eliab has a good read on his younger brother? I don't think so. And so in that case, if he's reading motives into David that isn't there, it's ironic. He accuses David of being full of pride and insolence, and who's actually the one that seems to be speaking and acting based on pride and stubbornness. Sounds more like it's Eliab than it is David. And maybe we could relate to that. Here's the older brother in front of his soldier buddies, and then here comes little brother acting like he might be willing to step into the battle, something Eliab hasn't been willing to do, and none of the others have been willing to do. You think there's some embarrassment, some jealousy, some pride? Well, any of us in that circumstance could kind of feel that rising in our hearts. So before we would speak in that, wisdom would say what? Well, don't let the first thing come out of your mouth when you feel you're embarrassed or jealous or a little bit prideful. The best thing you could do is wait and use words of instruction. So I won't take the time to, but we could go back through all of the Proverbs and apply them here to Eliab, and then just briefly look at David's reply. What does David say to big brother? Big brother and little brother, they've probably clashed in the past, but now here they are in a different circumstance, away from father, away from home. How does David answer his brother? Verse 29, David said, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?" In other words, is there not a reason for what I've said? And then he turned from him towards another. There's another proverb that says, "A soft answer turns away wrath." Here, the younger brother restrains his lips, and he just stops the quarrel. I think one of the proverbs we read either this morning or tonight talked about water. Water being released is like a quarrel, so stop it before it starts, and that's what David does here. And so think of these principles, whether you're a sibling, a child, or a parent. Which of these proverbs applies to the habit of your speech? Now, we might all have an exception to our habit. If our habit is not good, there might be occasions where we speak better. Or if our habit is what it ought to be, there might be occasions where we don't speak as we ought to be, and we need to take those individual moments seriously. But just test your own words. Are they the result of waiting, of listening, words that are the result of instruction, or words that are the result of impulse? What Solomon would say is, buy instruction and do not sell it for impulse. Buy the truth, do not sell it. Buy wisdom, instruction, and then buy understanding, Solomon says. Turn to Proverbs, back to chapter 23. Part of the wisdom of God and part of what involves faith in God is that when we understand something He said, we don't have to understand everything on the subject. We want to understand what God wants us to understand, but sometimes there's a point at which we can say, I understand enough. I don't have to experience it in order to understand it. I don't have to understand it to the height and the depth and the width. I understand it enough to just accept God's warnings, and that's part of the help that God offers us. There's some things He helps us to understand it, and to just understand it enough that we ought to learn, I don't want to understand it any more clearly than that, at least by experience. I want us to think about two examples where God offers to teach us with sufficient understanding so that we don't have to understand it by experience. First is, in Proverbs 23, 29 to 35, what the Bible teaches about alcohol or wine. It would be an occasion where God teaches us enough so that we don't have to learn it and understand it by experience. Read this section with me. Proverbs 23, beginning of verse 29. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart will utter perverse things. Yes, you'll be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or like one who lies at the top of the mast, saying, They have struck me, but I was not hurt. They have beaten me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake that I may seek another drink? So the person who reads this paragraph and understands it, understands the effect of the wine that he's talking about. But someone who lives in ignorance, someone who denies this, like verse 29, is it a stretch to say the person who does these things, when they're asked, do you have sorrow? Do you have woe and contentions and complaints? Do you have wounds and you don't know how they got there, and redness of eyes? And they would say, no, I don't know what you're talking about. They would deny it. They understand by experience, but they're a fool. They deny it, and maybe even have lied to themselves enough that they don't really get it. But notice the example in verse 32. If someone showed you, hey, here's this snake. We're blessed not to have this problem in Alaska. But hey, here's this snake. If it bites you, it's going to kill you. Do you understand enough? Or do you have to pick it up and be bitten by it in order to learn the lesson? That's exactly what he's doing here. You don't have to understand its poison by experience. You can understand its poison just by observation. And so God, through the wisdom of Solomon, offers to help us today. And we need to be prepared. It's often today, sometimes even there are Christians, and they'll say, well, I just drink a little bit. I just lightly drink alcohol just for pleasure. And whether we do that or not, it's just a matter of opinion. And then they go on to deny the reality that is discussed here. They deny the reality of the effect of alcohol. Have you ever heard someone say, well, I drink, but I don't get drunk? That is a contradiction of terms. And here's something that maybe some just aren't aware of. I've shown this before and had people say, well, I didn't know that. The amount of alcohol that's in a typical 12-ounce, the common beer, the amount of alcohol in that is the same amount of alcohol in a 5-ounce glass of wine, and it's the same alcohol that's in just a 1.5 ounce of the hard stuff. The same amount of alcohol. If you drink the same amount, whichever one, you have the same amount in your system, going to your brain, doing what we read there. So there would be people who would say, well, I just have one or two of those. I would never touch the hard stuff. Well, ultimately, there is no difference. And the effect is no different. And that's why people drink it. It's for the effect, even often when they deny it. Another lesson maybe for another time is, but people will say, well, but Jesus made wine, the wedding in John chapter 2. But what they don't consider or ignore is that Jesus could make wine that would not intoxicate. Jesus could make a drink that was either juice, that of course would not intoxicate, or it's also possible that Jesus made something that was so diluted in its alcohol content, it would not intoxicate. But in America, nobody makes a drink like that. That you drink 2, 3, 4, 5 cups like you would at a wedding. Any kind of American typical style drink, alcoholic drink, you're going to be intoxicated. Jesus could make something so diluted it would never have had that effect one way or the other, or it could have been just simple as we would say juice. So the book of Proverbs offers to help us understand the subject of wine and of alcohol so that we don't have to learn by experience. And then last, go to Proverbs chapter 7. I'm going to tread gently and wisely here, but try to say enough to be clear, and then maybe enough for parents to decide at what phase of life or season of life to expand on these things. But the book of Proverbs, the first, especially within the first 9 chapters, there's some general instruction about wisdom, but there's some very specific instruction from a father to a son. Notice he didn't leave it to the priests to have this conversation with his son, but a father warning his son about the harlot. Of course, typically a harlot is a prostitute, but when we look at what he says, it would apply to the subject of sexual immorality on any occasion. But there's two tactics of the harlot, two tactics of the general application of sexual immorality that we can pick up on in the book of Proverbs that will protect us from the end of that. And the first is in verse 10, Proverbs 7, verse 10. He's describing here a young man who's just simple, who's naive, and he wanders into the area of this woman. In verse 10, there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot. Attire being the clothing. The attire of a harlot. What's the purpose of the attire of a harlot? It's sight, of course. It's to catch the attention. It's to catch the eye. So I don't know what the custom was, what the harlot of that day would wear, but whatever it was something so that when you saw her, you would know what she was advertising. That could happen in a lot of different ways. Today, there's no question. How does someone dress when they are marketing themselves? Well, they show you some of the product, and sight is one of the tactics. That's at least in American culture, that's the attire of the harlot. They know how to advertise. It may be by something low cut up top that reveals the breast, just a little, or something high down low that reveals the thigh. But one way or the other, we all know those are the parts of the body, and it's sight. Sight is the tactic because sight catches attention. The challenge in our culture today is it isn't just the harlot. Our culture has made it acceptable to reveal some portion of the chest by a low neckline, to reveal some portion of the thigh by a high skirt or by just common athletic shorts. And our society says, well, they're stylish, they're comfortable, they're athletic, all the way to say that it's just normal. But God says it isn't normal. I won't go into the whole lesson tonight, but God connects shame. God says it's shameful, and our country says it's normal. We can list a whole lot of things our country ought to be ashamed of, and here's one of them. What our culture says is comfortable and stylish, God says is shameful. And it's tied to the tactic of the sexually immoral to catch attention first by sight. And then in verse 13, here's one more tactic that he's trying to teach his son to be aware of. Verse 13, so she caught him and kissed him with an impudent face. Then she said to him. So first she gets his attention with sight, and then by touch. When it says she grabs him, she doesn't grab him by the arm and jerk him. She gets his attention with his eyes and then with her touch, physical touch. That's her tactic. She pulls him close. You have to be close to someone to kiss someone, but she didn't kiss him first. First she grabbed him. She pulled him close. It's the physical contact. That will get his attention. And then the kiss, of course, is more intimate contact. That's designed to get his attention. She had a crafty heart back in verse 10. She knew what she was doing to get attention with the eye and then to get attention with the physical contact. Today, that's commonly accepted, just in a different context. I assume prostitutes wouldn't be allowed to do that. But today, the typical couples dancing in our society is designed to do the same thing. It's designed to get to the same place as she got him. A place for closer and closer physical contact. Now again, our society is going to say, well, it's romantic, it's fashionable, it's a talent, it is normalized in our society. I've even heard elementary schools that they'll have a couples dance for the kids to go out and put their arms around each other or here or there. That just normalizes it at a young age so it doesn't become uncomfortable later. But the warning here is it should be uncomfortable. He's warning his son, don't you be uncomfortable there with her. And the words in the Bible that God would use would be lewd or sensual. And the point is that it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop with lewd. Lewd is intentionally going somewhere. She didn't intend to stop with the sight or to stop with the physical contact. She was leading him somewhere. And I'll let parents pick up the ball from there. But here is the same example. God's offering to help us understand enough so that we don't have to understand it all by experience. By understanding. And you'll understand it enough without experience. If not, if you sell understanding, then you'll have the experience, and the book of Proverbs is full of the fruit of that kind of knowledge. So we all understand the buying and selling process, especially those of you who are old enough to understand what I'm saying. When you're young, you're learning what to buy and sell with the money that you earn and what's worth the trade and what isn't. And so Solomon is saying something true for every age of life, but especially the context of Proverbs is to the young. Buy the truth, buy wisdom, buy instruction, buy understanding, and do not sell it, or else realize what you buy when you do sell. But if you'll buy wisdom, truth and wisdom and instruction and understanding, God will give you more than you can ever buy. God will give you more than you can buy, and God will give you more than you can have in any other way. As my children are at phase of life that they are, I continue learning the richness of reading the book of Proverbs on my own or as a family. And so thank you for the time to study. This is for my benefit, and I hope it will be for yours as well. Turn in your songbooks to number 747. Buy the truth and do not sell it. Think about the truth that we've been reminded of, whether in this lesson or in some song earlier, or in something that's been on your mind today. If it reminds you of your sin and your separation from God because of your sin, then buy the truth. And of course, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. If you need to confess your faith and be baptized, Jesus will keep his promise to forgive your sins. If as a Christian you've sold the truth, then buy the truth tonight. Come back to him and confess your sin. Tell us how we can encourage you and help you. Think about that as we sing this song, and think about the blessings that we have by buying the truth and not selling it as we stand and sing.
No tears in heaven, no sorrows given, all will be glory in that land. There'll be no sadness, all will be gladness, when we shall join that happy band. No tears